Knowing this near universal pattern helps to assess new brands and existing ones.
What don't marketers know?
Quite a lot. Marketers, I actually live in an anything-goes world where the latest fashion or fad drives an awful lot of practice.
Segmentation is the recognition you can't serve everyone with equal satisfaction.
This is the Zac Anesbury Show.
Welcome. On today's podcast, we have Professor Colin Campbell. Colin is an associate professor of marketing at the University of San Diego in California, United States. Colin is also famous for being the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Advertising Research, one of our field's top-tier journals, which bridges the gap between academia and industry. Colin has had a truly international career, landing various positions at all sorts of prestigious universities. His excellent giving nature meant that he never declined a review, but these good deeds have paid off, having been invited to many editorial review boards and eventually resulting in becoming the editor-in-chief of JAR. We discussed together the value of research in marketing education, and we then compare and contrast the different approaches to research, whether that's specialising or having a generalisable research agenda. Colin provides terrific insights to us about one of his latest articles, which discusses the role of deepfakes and artificial intelligence in advertising. You're not going to want to miss that one. We wrap up our conversation by gaining some amazing tips from Colin about how to use our time to the most maximum efficiency and how we can land our first job in marketing. So without further ado, Professor Colin Campbell. Perfect. So welcome, Colin. Thank you very much for joining us for the podcast today and taking time out of your, I was going to say busy day, but you just told me that it's actually your evening. So from your free and available evenings, you've decided to speak to us. So thank you very much for that.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
One of the best ways to kind of start for us and for the audience is to, I know quite a lot about you and we've met, but to provide them with a little bit of insights as to, who is this Colin guy that we're hearing about today?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm an associate professor here at the University of San Diego in California. And I'm also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Advertising Research at the moment as well, too. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very impressive CV, as I'm sure everyone will hear in a minute. So I like to go all the way back, and it could be pretty recently, I guess. But when did you start to think that marketing was something for me, and I guess for you in particular, advertising? When did that all sort of come to fruition?
Probably during my university days in the beginning, during undergrad, just because of the fact that I knew I always liked business, and my dad's an engineer, so he was sort of pushing me to become an engineer. But I liked the business side sort of more interesting. I thought it was more interesting. And the marketing just kind of came out of finding it interesting. So I've always liked economics. I found marketing just kind of cool because it was a kind of a neat blend of both the science and also the art side of things as well too.
Right. So was it through high school you did some business sort of type courses that set you up?
It was in in undergrad. Yeah. So in Canada I went to school in Canada. There's no real business courses in high school, right? It's your typical sort of math, science, English, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Just for context for you, we kind of have almost prerequisites for it. So we have business studies and accounting and those sorts of subjects that you kind of need to do to then get into your business course at the university level.
That's cool. Yeah. No, they don't have that. I guess you could take AP, the sort of first year university courses in high school, but the one I went to didn't actually have that, so it wasn't really a thing. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's fascinating. So, what was your first year of undergraduate like? So, you did a Bachelor of Business Administration, specialising in marketing and economics, at the Beatty School of Business at Simon Fraser University. So, what did your first year look like then?
It's a sort of a liberal arts style degree. So the first year is really kind of your prerequisites that you take, English, philosophy, math, calculus, all that kind of stuff, right? But it wasn't really that businessy until you kind of get into your third or fourth year of the degree. And that's where I enjoyed economics. So I started taking more and more economics as my electives. And then that, as a result, I just had so many courses. I'm like, I might as well just go for a dual degree and include that as well too. Yeah.
It's interesting that you enjoyed economics. Like you hear a lot of undergraduate students who are, marketing specialists or whatever, and they don't enjoy that course. But similar to you, one of my favorite courses was, I think it was Intro to Microeconomics or something. And the content was relatively dry. And this was back when they had overhead projectors and they would be.
I had that too, yeah.
But my lecturer at the time, Ken Adams, I think his name was, he was a very funny man. And so I kind of thought to myself, if this guy can make a course that most people don't like and are kind of forced to do and make it enjoyable, I've sort of adopted some of his teaching style along the way, actually.
Oh, that's very cool. Okay.
Yeah. So you found the content very interesting, or lecture?
Yeah, for some reason, I find economics, like the theories and the ideas of how it works seem kind of like to make sense to me. The math is like a bit more terrifying, I must say. Like doing it like at an undergrad level is very approachable. At least I found it pretty approachable. But then when I went to do my master's, I discovered that doing matrix, algebra, differential equations and stuff, right, is much more difficult than going through and doing it in a simple form in undergrad. So like there I was like, whoa, there's a lot happening here. And as you notice, I then turned back to marketing for my PhD. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you did your Master of Economics at the University of British Columbia. And you returned back to your undergraduate university for your PhD, right?
That's right. Yeah. So those are the two like major universities in Vancouver, which is where I grew up. And so basically I was wanting to stay in Vancouver for education. And so it was just easy to kind of flip back and forth between those. And I'd actually like run into a professor from my undergrad at a Starbucks, actually, halfway through my econ master's. And he was the one who was like, oh, well, if you thought about doing a PhD, you were a strong student. I'd discuss some, research grants as well too. Have you considered doing this? And then he basically got the admissions office in the business school to give me an extension because it was already past the deadline. And then I got the first GNet I could do, which I think was a week later or something. And then obviously, was okay enough to be able to get in. And then the rest is kind of history from there. So
yeah, very nice. Do you think your the master's in economics, did that help you during your PhD at all?
I think so, definitely, because it's more research based, the way that they were teaching it, right? Like I went for the economics master's primarily because of that. It was much cheaper. So in Canada, like the schooling is only quite cheap, or relative to the US anyways. And I think it was like $5,000 for like a master's in economics, whereas like an MBA was like $50,000. And so I was like, oh, like I like economics, why not? It's a 1-year program. I'll do this and sort of see what I want to do afterwards. And it was much more research based, so that was kind of cool. And obviously, I learned like regression in a bunch of different ways because like economists are very good at going through and doing regressions in very detailed ways. So
yeah, that's especially what I was thinking. It would help you with all the maths and equations and regressions, especially, for sure. I noticed that your PhD is it 6 years, the program that you did, and so that struck me as a little bit different because I'm from obviously Australia.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, okay, our program's generally 3 to 4 years. And I was just wondering the differences there.
Well, I think it's maybe just like the timing is probably what drove that, because it's like you start like in September 2006, was it? Yeah. And then I actually graduated in January 2011, right before I was moving to Monash. I'm moving down to Melbourne actually, to go work at my first job in Monash. And so like I guess it's like the years are like it's really more so like 2006 to 2010, I guess. Yeah. But still, yeah. But no, like I think it's becoming more typical in the US and Canada to go longer, just because there's people coming out with like really strong publication records. Mm-hmm. And so like the bar kind of keeps going up and up in terms of like what you need to kind of be able to be marketable in the job market. So
yeah, I heard someone coming back from a US based conference and they were talking about having almost like a hero paper or something like that. Like they were trying to get into marketing or journal consumer research, or at least under first or second round of revision. And that would be their kind of ticket into the academic world.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like there's some people who are like coming out of like major schools and they've got like, a couple of GCRs or a couple of things like that. It's just like, whoa, it's impressive, but it definitely must take a lot of work as well too. And I guess you need extra time to actually get that going, right? Because like in the US and Canada, it's like you have two years of coursework, and then you have like basically a year to work on your thesis proposal, and then typically you defend that, and then that same summer you go in the job market. All right. And then hopefully you spend like the fall kind of working your thesis and getting like hopefully offers from like schools and doing like interviews. And then hopefully you will wrap that up October, November. And then you have the rest until like basically May, June to kind of finish up your thesis, right? That's the idea. So, and often you'll have your job offers continued upon finishing your thesis, right? So if you don't finish in time, they actually can pull their offer. Not all schools do that, right? But so like there's definitely a good motivation to kind of go through and get that done. But it's pretty quick then. You get like the 2 years of coursework, 1 year to basically get your idea together. And then the last year is basically just getting hired and wrapping up, right?
Yeah.
So like having an extra year or even a year and a bit gives you just more breathing room too. So
yeah, okay. Yeah. I don't know, do any of the universities in Australia, operate that way? Because we definitely don't have a big coursework component at the University of South Australia.
Right. Yeah. I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't involved in the PhD program one, so I don't. If they have one, question mark, I should know this, but I don't.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting one. And yeah, so I've heard they're actually quite useful programs in some sense, but yeah, it cuts into your naturally your thesis time. Some of the best advice I had. So I did honors and then a master's by research, and then went into PhD. And it was advice that Professor Rachel Kennedy had given me, which was don't jump from your honors into a PhD. You're kind of technically allowed to because you got a first class, but take those 2 years out during your masters, learn additional research skills, get some runs on the board with publications, because it will make you more, hireable and more competitive when you finish your PhD.
Yeah.
And as a young person, you're kind of like a bit in a rush and push forward. And but I did, after about a couple of days, I did realize she was spot on with her advice, and I've been forever grateful since for those exact reasons you said.
That's good. Yeah.
Is that advice that you would give to other people? And
I think it really depends. Or I mean, like I guess here it's like easier potentially to just like extend the program, right? Yeah. But I mean, it sounds like if that's not possible in Australia, then I guess the approach to UCheck could make sense, especially if you're already employed too, right? That's always good.
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely. So you completed your PhD, and in terms of your first academic job, it was something along the lines of an instructor or something like that. Was that still during your PhD candidature?
Oh yeah, so I was teaching while I was doing my PhD as well too. Like it was like an instructor. I guess like you could think like lecturer might be what they call it in Australia.
Yeah.
Right. But it wasn't a formal role. It's just like as you do your PhD, you also do teaching. And so like depending on some schools, you might do like one course you teach just to kind of check the box before going publications. So before going on the job market. And that'll be like typical of more research heavy schools. And then more balanced schools will have it where they'll be teaching or doing TAing as well too, as you're going through and doing your PhD. And that's part of the funding package that you get to basically support yourself during that time. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. And so it is not just tutoring, right? You're actually running the course?
Oh yeah, I was teaching courses. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. So I think it started like 6 months in or something. Because they needed somebody to help out with like the econ, one of the econ classes for like, it was like a pre-MBA program type thing that they have for like people who are like trying to qualify for the MBA but are kind of on the edge. They'll have them do like a couple of classes to kind of prove themselves and get a better sense of it. And they needed somebody to help with that. And so I started doing that, and then I started doing some marketing courses as well too. But I did it, pretty early on. So
yeah. Did you find that to be in hindsight, to be such a benefit for you, like when you then went onto the open job market, because you had that additional extra skill, the extra training and stuff like that?
It really depends where you're going. So if you're aiming for like a really, like top tier sort of research school, they would see that as like a negative because it's taken away time from research, and they would much value more if they want you to show that you can teach and that you should have like a course or two that you've done with good evals, but they would care much more about publications, right? So it really depends like where you're going. Whereas some schools will like that. They're like, oh, you already have 2 or 3 courses prepped, you know how to teach. This is not just a one-off, right? You can do it reliably over a couple, years or semesters, right? That could be a good thing. So it really just depends on like where you want to be going. Yeah.
Yeah. And what your passions are, whether you want to be purely teaching, like more of a balanced. Yeah, I think that's great advice actually for people to really think about where do I want to end up at the end of my PhD, and then find a program that helps you get to that purely research balance.
I mean, pragmatically as well too. Like we also got, the more teaching you did, the more money you made, right? So like there was an incentive. Like if you can make extra money, why not, right? That's always good too. But there is that trade-off of like maybe it was better to spend that time on more research. I don't know. It's always tough, right? It's looking back.
I don't know. I find there's some sort of value to teaching people things. Like I was teaching like the consumer behavior course for postgrads, I think during my PhD, maybe early in my PhD. And I was talking about, segmentation and brand user profile stuff. And I started questioning some of the concepts I was teaching them in real time. And I stopped and I paused, and I remember writing a note, and I said, apologies for the interruption. I needed to write this down, but if I forgot it. Ended up being a publication 2 years later.
Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. Yeah.
I started critiquing the stuff I was teaching, and I'm like, let's see if I can find something here.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So I think there's value for teaching for sure. So you then had a visiting professor role. What does that entail? I wasn't quite sure what that sort of refers to.
Oh, yeah, it's a little bit vague on the CV, I guess, right? So that one was basically, I wasn't actually there for a long period of time. So there was a colleague I knew who was working on with some research, and they needed some people to help out with like short courses, because the University of Mannheim has a pretty strong like international student program. It's one of the few sort of German schools that runs in the US schedule. So it makes it easy for them to get like transfer students in for like, not transfer, but like I guess exchange students is the right word, in for like a semester or something. And they just wanted some people to like help out with that, like with teaching. So basically it was just going over to teach like block courses for like a week or two to a bunch of their exchange students, because they obviously taught those in English because they were people from all around the world. And so I was just going and doing that. I did that for, I guess 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Did that involve any sort of research component to that as well?
I was like basically going over to teach was an excuse to like for me to come over and get paid. And then I would work with the colleagues there on like research as well too.
Yeah.
So it was kind of good. It's always nice you can do both, right? So
yeah. And what city is that in? So you said it's in Germany, but which city?
It's basically like a 40-minute train ride from like Frankfurt. So it's pretty convenient getting out of it's a big airport, yeah.
Yeah. I haven't been to that city yet, but I've heard it's gorgeous, right?
Heidelberg is. So Mannheim is like, it was a city that they built pretty quickly after World War II. So it's not the most, picturesque city. It's a cool city, but it's not the most picturesque. Heidelberg is like a 15-minute train ride. That one is stunning. It's like I think it's like a preserved heritage site or something. There's like a huge castle on the top of a mountain. It's just by the river. It's very, very, very pretty. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. The world is, when you can find those little nuggets of joy in the world. So you then moved to Monash as a lecturer.
That was my first job after my PhD.
Yeah, very cool. So you moved to Australia then?
Yeah, I moved down to Australia. I was there for 2 years, and then from there I went and moved to Kent State, which is in like Kent, Ohio. It's about 45 minutes south of Cleveland, and I was there for 5.5 years. And then I moved out to San Diego in 2018. I've been here now for, I guess, almost 6 years. Crazy. Yeah, it goes fast. Yeah.
So you moved, you seem to have no problems moving around the world. You're in Canada, and then you've moved to Germany for a bit, and then you moved to Australia.
Well, I didn't move to Germany. I was just visiting Germany when I was yeah. So I'd go for like a week, come back, and then, go for a week again, like 6 months later, right? So, yeah.
How do you find that? Is it just something you're natural to, or?
Like my family, when we were younger, we moved like a little bit as well too. So like I'm not averse to it. It obviously I think it gets easier as well too as you kind of go through it. But I think probably the first one, like moving to Australia, I thought it would not be as much work as it was, just because of the fact that we'd gone down. My family has like friends who live in Brisbane, and so we've been down 2 or 3 times when I was younger. But it's like visiting is very different than moving. Because on the surface, I think they're, Canada, the US, Australia, they're all industrialized, affluent countries. Things work reasonably well everywhere, right? But then there's different systems, right? So Canada and the US, I think are somewhat similar, but there's still differences. But I think there's a lot more differences in Australia, I think, in just sort of how processes operate and things like that, like getting a new bank account or just the way that credit cards are run, stuff like that. And I didn't really know, but then of course, once you get, you kind of have to go through it, so.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. How did you find the process of applying for your first job and getting that role at Monash? Was it fairly difficult, or?
I mean, it was an interview, right? So it was at Summer AMA. Had an interview with Mike Ewing and then Colin Jevons, like the typical sort of interviewing style, right? And then the rest is kind of history from there. So I wasn't doing it was right after the financial crisis, 2011. So I would have been interviewing a year earlier. And so it was basically, kind of a tough job market that year. So I was just sort of doing a soft set of interviews, and Monash worked out. So I was down to do that. And yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely do worse than Monash. Very well ranked globally.
That's true.
Yeah. And from what I hear, good research budgets as well to support young academics and established academics. So you moved then back to the US. Did you move to, was it a higher position, or was it similar, moving sort of horizontal, or?
Oh, I was just looking to go back to the US because I found that it just I was hoping to be honest, be in Kent State probably for a couple of years, and it just ended up being longer, just in terms of I got kind of busy with course prep, and I was also learning stuff. There's some really good people there that I learned a lot from as well too. And then just time kind of flies sometimes too, right? So I was getting a lot done, kind of retooling, upskilling some of my research stuff, obviously expanding my teaching as well too. And then it was whoa, it ended up being 5.5 years. So, I mean, going into it, I didn't expect that, but it was great. So.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. So when, so you moved around a little bit. Now you're at, it was university, whereabouts are you now?
University of San Diego.
Yeah, that's right, in California. So have you gone through the promotion system to get to associate professor, or have you kind of, gone for a level at one university and then managed to promote yourself to another university at a higher level?
Yeah. No, it's all been pretty horizontal up until I got tenure last summer.
Okay.
And I think I was the world's longest assistant professor, because I was basically an assistant professor for almost a decade, 11, 12 years, I guess. I don't know. But finally got it done last summer, so it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's sort of pros and cons about going with each of them, right? So I remember being a fresh-faced PhD student and going to conferences and meeting people and being it's this person and they're a senior lecturer from this university. And then coming back and seeing them at the same conference a year later, all of a sudden they're an associate professor at another university. And it made me realize that there was a different system, and it, you didn't have to get promoted with your own university. You could then sort of move.
You just jump, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably definitely easier. I think in some ways, do the whole tenure packet and stuff, although it may be different in Australia. But I think the UK does it a lot as well too. I know people in London jump around a lot, right? Just because of the fact that it's sometimes easier to get a new job with a different title than it is to actually get promoted, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not fun processes to go through. Promotion panels and writing your application and everything. Yeah,
it takes so much time. It's amazing. Yeah, but
exactly. Amazing. So I guess you've just gotten tenure. That's amazing. How does that sort of system then work in the US? Moving from, does that mean it was fixed term kind of contracts before that, or?
Technically, you're on a 1-year contract up until you get tenure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess we're still technically on 1-year contracts, but it's meant to be forever, I guess, because there's tenure. So.
Oh, okay. Well, you always hear that that's a good thing. We have a little bit of a different system where we usually work on fixed term contracts, and usually they're sometimes tied to research grants. So the research grant might give allocation for a level B or a level C or something like that for 6 months, 12 months. And then the continuing positions generally are tied to teaching. And then that's more balanced, 40% teaching, 40% research sort of thing. 50% admin or whatever they allocate for it. So you've had I think quite a stellar career moving between very prestigious sort of universities and getting to associate professor. No doubt professors on the cards relatively soon. But you've also had what I think is an incredibly impressive role through the journal system. So you're most famous, I guess, from how you sort of introduced yourself at the beginning of the podcast, which is the editor-in-chief of Journal of Advertising Research, quite fondly known as JAR or JAR around people. But your association there is quite long, like over a decade, from starting to review and publishing within that journal. I guess some of us would be thinking, how did your relationship start with JAR?
With JAR, I think it was when one of my early publications was actually in JAR. And like usually once you publish in a journal, you're then part of like the database. And I think I probably just started like reviewing. And my suspicion is like, to be honest, like I did not realize that like you could decline invites to review. I mean, I knew you could decline them, but I didn't think you were meant to. So like I always just said yes. And like I do this for like most journals, unless there's something like terribly weird happening in my life, I will just say yes because like you just have to kind of do it, right? And so like I guess I ended up reviewing a lot for them, and then I won like a best reviewer award, I think 2017 or 18 or something, I don't know. And then like they were looking for somebody like an AE to help with like some of the more industry focused papers that they had. And then based on the work I'd done with them, that's when they approached me for that. And then apparently like after like John Ford did a great job for like 8 years. It was a super long time as an editor. I'm very appreciative of his efforts for that. But they were looking for somebody to follow him up, and I got like a random email that I was in the running for that, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. So it was a total surprise. I did not know looking or even that I was in the running for that. But I think it just really comes back to going through, and I've done like I think 60 or something, 70 reviews for JAR for the longest time. So like they can get a sense of the quality of your reviews and your consistency with that. I've also published in the journal as well too, right? So they know the kind of style of work that you do as well. And I think like both of those things just kind of help, right? I think it's just going through and doing good quality work, whether it's reviewing or publishing, and just being consistent. And it takes a while, but people seem to notice after a while, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Okay, so step one for a young academic might be try to publish in the journals that you're trying to be an expert in. And then getting sort of a bit of a foothold in the reviewing system, because you would kind of be flagged on their database as, this is John Smith and he's an expert on this type of area. Okay.
Yeah, and you can always say that you're down to review as well too. Like sometimes it just will happen. The journals will just do it. I can tell you like right now, like we have to actively turn you on as like an ad hoc reviewer, like add you in as that. Mm-hmm. And like we're open, if anybody can, who's a qualified, you've got some sort of experience in academia or industry as well too. If you're interested in reviewing, we're happy to, definitely try you out as a reviewer. So please email if you're interested. And what we also do, and I started doing this last summer, is you can pull all of the statistics down of like the reviewers. And so that's what I've done. Like I did it this last summer and then last year as well too. So like I think it was July this year, and then July I guess it would be the early beginning of September last year, pulled down all the data and then looked at like who are people who are ad hoc reviewers that are doing good quality reviews for us and are doing at least a couple a year, right? And then let's promote them to the ERB. Let's move them up, right? Because like I think that's sort of the progression kind of goes like ad hoc to like ERB and then potentially to like AE at some point as well too, right?
Yeah. Okay. And so when you're first reviewing for JAR and, dear Dr. Anesbury, we have a manuscript entitled blah, 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 and I accept it. Yeah. You have a turnaround time of, is it 4 weeks roughly?
Yeah, some journals have 4 weeks. We have 21 days. We shortened it up a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I am a good reviewer and I submit my review in the 21-day period, and I've given detailed, thoughtful feedback. How do you keep tabs on reviewers that are doing a good job versus potentially reviewers who are not doing a good job? What's sort of the process behind your journal there?
Yeah. So the more formal kind of process is like all of the reviews go back to the associate editor. And the associate editor, like it's not apparent to the reviewers or the authors, but there's actually an internal rating system. So kind of like Uber, right? Where the AEs can rate the quality of the reviews, and those numeric scores then go through and they get basically collated against like each person's name, right? And so like I'm going to have some score in the system, like you would have the scoring system as well too if you're reviewing, right? And that's basically what we can pull and take a look at and see like what that person's scores are like. The more sort of like qualitative approaches of like every single paper that comes back with a decision, like I look at the stuff, right? So the AEs are saying it, and then it also comes through me, right? So like I can see the quality of like the reviews that are being returned and the decisions as well too. The decisions are also tracked too. So if like somebody is like constantly rejecting everything or constantly accepting everything, or they're recommending that, I guess that's also tracked too. Like, are they, what is their distribution of like outcomes that they're recommending?
Ah, that's very interesting. So I kind of suspected there would be this person does timely reviews and this person does good quality reviews.
That's also tracked too.
Didn't realize that you were tracking whether someone was consistently accept or reject or something like that. Oh,
it's in the system too, because there's some people who lean one way or the other, which we all have different opinions. That's great, right? But it's sometimes it's useful to kind of know what that baseline is, right? So
yeah. And it's funny that you said that, like, when you first started reviewing, you were like, any email that come your way saying, can you review this? You're like, yeah, no, I owe it back to my academic community to sort of do it. Like, I'm in the same boat as you. And, I've just found myself so poor of time recently, being a number of different journals, that I've just focused to the ones that I'm now on the editorial review board for. And others who send to me, unless they're like specifically in my research role and it's going to be a very good paper, I just can't. I just don't have the time. At first,
it can be tough, right?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So it can be tough for sure, but I mean, I would definitely encourage, like, I'm sure you've already done this, is to like think about ways you can be more efficient as a reviewer too. Yeah. So like, I would definitely like, and I learned this from like some colleagues as well, as like, I'd suggest like keep some of your different reviews that you have. Like, as I know, like I got this advice of like, some people have like templates for different types of comments that they'll give, because they're often like that. You could have comments around like the theoretical justification is not strong enough, right? And you might copy paste that paragraph and adapt it to the review you're doing, just like you would for students, right? Or the same thing for like, perhaps this idea needs to be more interesting, right? And you might have some suggestions around things like that. You can kind of copy paste that in, right? And adapt it as well too. And like, I think that's one trick to make it like a bit quicker to kind of go through. I also like to think about papers when I'm reviewing, because I review a lot as well, like you, right? Like I'll think about them in terms of triage, right? So like, there's some papers that are just awesome, right? And it's just like, those ones are like a dream because like they're rare, right? But like, there's not much you have to actually suggest. And then there's some that are in the middle where like there's a lot of work that needs to get done. Those ones probably take the most amount of time, because I have to go through and give like a ton of feedback, because they're close, but they're not quite there. If they're the ones that are just not going to happen for whatever reason, I used to go through and basically give all the feedback on the paper. And what I found is that with those particular papers, it's too much. Right. So what I'll do is I'll focus on like, these are the top 3 concerns, right? I've got, and then like describe those, because it just makes it faster to kind of go through this. And to be honest, I think sometimes like authors in that boat, I think it's actually kinder, right? Like, rather than like, here's 50 things wrong with the paper, like here's 3 things to think about that could make a really big difference to improving the quality of your paper. And I think it's more manageable for them. And it's also more manageable for us as well too, as reviewers.
Yeah. And I suppose like, that helps them in the bigger picture of, this paper's been rejected at a journal, and so now I'm going to go away and try to fix some of the reviewers' comments.
Yeah.
And if I've got 2 or 3 big picture things that I can fix, then the smaller things that would have been picked up anyway are going to get picked up during a minor or major revision elsewhere. Yeah. Okay.
That's
I like
exactly
that. That's
right.
really good efficient way.
There's also like, and I've started doing this as well too, is there's a lot of like good methods papers out there now. Is like, I can point people toward that, right? Or it's not our job as a reviewer to like go through a research design course on like, something, but you can point them to different articles or different resources, textbooks, whatever, to help, like, perhaps you want to take a look at doing this kind of a design, go look at like whatever that might be. But like, we don't have to go through it in detail, right? We can point them and help them that way too.
Yeah. That's unbelievably good advice. So you've moved, let's just move from reviewers who are ad hocs and now move to editorial review board. They've done a good job, timely reviews, great quality, and have thought through whether accept, minor, major, reject type of situation. And congratulations, they're now promoted to an associate editor. What are the key metrics for an associate editor? This is where my knowledge kind of falls down a little bit here.
Yeah, that one's a bit like it's probably a more niche role, but I think you could think of it just like an associate editor is kind of like a grand like reviewer, because they're looking across the like 2 or 3 or 4 reviews to come back, and they're kind of like orchestrating across those of like, there's sense checking, like maybe they know that somebody has work in that area and they're being critical potentially because it's a conflict for them or something, right? Or maybe they know that somebody's being too kind and that review isn't good quality, so they send it to someone else, right? They're looking across that to see like what's reasonable, what's not reasonable to do, what themes are kind of coming through, right? They might step in a bigger way if, perhaps a reviewer drops out or something. If you're in like R&Rs, that happens as well. But they're really kind of like looking to synthesize across the different reviews and then also kind of identify what they think are the key things to kind of like move the paper forward, right? What's interesting as well too is that like reviewers often think of themselves as like being critical, which is important, right? But part of it's also being constructive. And I think a good AE should be more constructive perhaps than critical, assuming a paper is of good enough quality. If there's potential for the paper, they should be trying to like help the authors improve the paper and make it as strong as it could be.
Yeah. Oh, so they're synthesizing a lot of information across, different people with potentially different agendas. And so knowing academics and so knowing the landscape seems to be pretty important there. Who's publishing and what their point of view might be, whether they have ideas that are conflicting or not. Yeah, okay. I can see that. Is there any?
No, it's interesting. Yeah.
So they're like sort of, I guess, subjective kind of things that, in some sense, the reviewers AE is doing. Is there any objective measures that JAR or other journals sort of track to do with, is for example, similar? Like, do you monitor how many papers an AE recommends for accepting? How many?
Oh, yeah.
How many they're
for sure.
Like if they're pushing everything out to review, but they should be desk rejecting themselves like half of the papers, or time or anything like that. Are there sort of metrics you track there? Yeah,
probably the biggest one at JAR is going to be time, because I've been really pushing to get I want our turnaround time to be like a month or less. Yeah. Just because I feel like it's as an author, I find that to be really helpful. I find it very frustrating if a paper goes off and disappears for 4 months, especially when like if it's on a topical issue, right? So I want to get that down. And we've been pretty good. I think our average was like 23 or something last year, 23 days, which is pretty good. Yeah. I think that might include ones that are desk rejected, which would bring it down. So I still have to check that number, but it's definitely like getting quicker, which is good. So part of it's like how fast can a AE get in and like get it out to reviewers, and then how fast can they go through and synthesize those reviews and also like bring them together. Part of it's also going to be managing the review team, because if reviewers don't respond or if reviewers drop out, you then have to maybe ask for an emergency review or ask for other reviewers, or even like nudge reviewers too. Sometimes it's like, hey, like, how are you doing? Like, you're a couple days late. Are you still doing this? If so, can you please submit it? Right. Just to kind of keep the process moving. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's good to know that these things are sort of tracked. And then obviously, like I see like when the summaries come in, right? So like that's part of it too. Of like a good AE will go through and like they will, if there's conflict among the reviewers, they will A, address it, and B, provide some sort of direction as to how to deal with that. Because there's nothing more frustrating than authors, than an author when you either get too many different ideas and it's like, which ones do I prioritize? Or the worst thing is you get conflicting ones and you're like, they say not to do A and they say to do A. Like, what do you do? And so, like an AE should be stepping in and providing like that. These are the key things. Focus on this reviewer, maybe less so on that one, whatever the case might be, but to give that kind of like overall direction of what to do. Yeah, absolutely. Have you found that that some of the key issues at the moment is potentially seeking reviewers? So say you need 2 or 3 people to give a review to then make a judgment on it. Are you needing to recruit 4, 5, 6 people to get those 3 reviewers? And is this a trend that's across all journals, or? It seems to be that it's been tough lately getting reviewers. I do agree. I hear that from other editors as well too. And like that's something that I'm definitely aware of. And this is as part of like that was one of the key metrics that I went through and looked at in July when I sort of went through all of the reviewers in our system. Was looking at like, do they say they're going to review and not review, which is terrible, right? Yes. I mean, it happens for different reasons, right? But please don't do that. Or like just not responding to reviews as well too, right? Both of those are really bad because they just hold up the process. It's like, if you can't review, things happen for sure. Please tell us like ASAP, right? If you're unable, if something happens terrible in your life, that's those things happen as well too. But again, please like let us know, because like the system sends multiple reminders, and like any of those emails you can respond and say, I'm so sorry, like something happened or whatever, but just please let us know as soon as possible. Because like ultimately it's the authors, and like I think a lot of them as well are junior scholars who are waiting for this for the careers, right? So I don't want them waiting 2 months and wondering what's happening. I want to get it back to them as soon as possible. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. There's nothing worse than inviting someone and they accept, and then you're kind of where are they? But yeah, so communication really is key then.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just like we have to just have good people on the team, right? So like we've gone through and we've like expanded the ERB, we've expanded the ad hoc base dramatically as well. And like I said, I've also gone through and identified people who are either not responding and they seem too busy. That's fine, but like we're not going to include them in the reviewer set because it just holds up the process. And people who are on the borderline, we actually emailed some and we're just like, hey, like, you seem really busy, you know, are you still able to do this? If you are, that's fantastic. If not, that's fine too. But we just want to know, like, are you in or out, right? So,
yeah, and yeah, exactly right. Because life gets busy. People might have had some health issues themselves or in the family, or started children, or something.
Yeah, no, things happen for sure, right? So, yeah. That communication thing, because I do see it as, I mean, it is usually an act of service in some sense towards the journal and giving back to the community that you're, because you expect good quality reviews in a timely manner yourself. So I think it's your role then to provide that to other people. So it's kind of a respect thing, but also like it's a bit of a, I think it's an honorary thing to be associated with journals actually. Yeah, it's kind of cool. I mean, I think that people often like look at reviewing as like work, I think in some ways, and see it as like a negative. But I think the reality is it can actually be quite helpful. And like I do probably between 50 to 80 papers a year I review, right, outside of the journal, right? Just because of the fact that I'm on like a bunch of ERBs and stuff, right? But like I think it's interesting because like you get to see what are the new issues people are looking at, right? I first learned about prolific through a paper I was reviewing. I learned about, you know, like OpenAI and ChatGPT through a paper I was reviewing, like all these kind of like new tools and stuff, and like the visual stuff for AI as well. Like you see new methods, you kind of see like how people are approaching stuff, you know, the ways they're using process or other techniques, and you're like, this is interesting. It's also kind of cool seeing different writing styles. I find very helpful. But I think the most valuable thing for me is like it's a good sense check, right? Because like the part that I love the most, and JR does this as well, and most journals do, is that I send in my review, and then when the AE and the editor make the decisions, right, then we get a copy of the other reviews plus the decision. And so like I can see, like, was I the crazy one? Like, was I too harsh? Were two other smart people on the AE different than me? Or did I miss stuff that the other reviewers caught that I didn't, you know? Or vice versa, right? And it's kind of a good way to kind of calibrate. And I think a lot of people, especially younger ones, think they're too busy to review. But I'm like, actually, you learn a lot from doing that. And then the benefit now as a writer is that like I can be writing a paper and I can be imagining what the critiques are going to be. Right. Like, and especially with like younger people, there was one paper I was working on with a PhD student, and like he was like, oh no, like, because I had come back with a whole list of feedback. I'm like, this is what reviewers will care about. And we literally got the first set of reviews in because he wanted to get that quick. And I was like, okay. And like it literally was like the same stuff. And he was like, I'm like, you just learn from doing so many papers and seeing it, right? You're like, they're going to talk about that, they're going to complain about this, you know, like you just sense it, right? So, and it just makes it faster for you writing because you then can anticipate it, either do something to bring it up in the paper, or at least you know it's going to happen, right? So you can prepare for it and expect it, right? So
so you can read your work or the work of your peers and provide that reviewer insight. And I guess ultimately, yeah, like you said, it increases your chance of getting published yourself.
It does, yeah. It's also because like there's some really interesting papers out there, but there's also some papers that are very not so interesting, right? And I guess like seeing those, reviewing them, you're like, okay, let's try and do better work ourselves, right? We can kind of push ourselves, right? So.
And it's funny you should mention the you see those emerging trends through reviewing articles and stuff. But sometimes you see the butt end of trends as well. Like every now and again, they've slowly started disappearing, but I'll get like a COVID-19 paper, and it's like, like, the journal world has moved on, and so is industry, right? and you see the data sets from like March 2020 or something like that, and it's like, oh, you've obviously tried for a few years, and I really feel for you, but like our audience is not going to be interested in this paper. I'm sorry. Yeah, and that breaks. I actually find rejecting papers or recommending to the editor rejecting papers a little bit disheartening sometimes, especially if I feel like they have genuinely tried for this paper. And so I do try to frame things quite positively. And this is how you can increase your probability of getting accepted somewhere else.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I think that's important. But I think the biggest thing for me is like, is the topic interesting?
Yeah.
I think that that's the number one thing. Is like, if the topic's interesting, assuming the methods are done correctly and the people are reasonable in how they're going through doing the research, I think that having an interesting topic is such a huge leg up, right? I mean, an interesting topic without any good methods is not a good fit either. But if you have done a competent job of methods and you convince the review team that you could action their feedback, which is good, right? And you have an interesting topic, people usually will work with you. Like, you're going to get the attention of like editors. It'll be interesting to the AE. Like, they'll give you a bit more rope, right? You might get an extra round of review. They might lean toward major vision as opposed to reject, just because it's intriguing, right? So I think this having a cool topic, looking through it's like interesting is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So you do like obviously quite a lot with JR, but you alluded to being associated with a number of other journals. Who else?
Oh, no, just on the ERB, not AE. I'm not an AE anywhere else. No.
That'd be way too much work, I'd imagine.
That would be a lot. Yeah.
So it looks like you're associated with like even almost like the competitor Journal of Advertising. So you're on that.
Oh yeah. I mean, to be honest, I did a special issue for the JA actually before JAR. I'm actually quite proud of it that we had a special section, I should say. It was like part of the journal, part of the issue, but it was on influencer marketing or advertising, right? And like I did it with Sarah Rosengren, and like we had some really cool papers in that special issue or special section. It was quite cool. So
yeah, do special issue papers tend to get cited pretty well?
I think it depends on the topic, honestly, right? I think if the topic is one that's relevant, potentially, and I think it really depends what the topic is, right? So
and you're part of the review boards for the services industries journal.
Yep, that's right. So there was the editor for that was actually at Kent State, and so she asked me to like join the ERB to help out with some papers on social media and stuff like that were related to some like my interests. And so I joined to help her out, and then I just sort of stayed on it, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So you were well known for a certain area. They knew that you'd be able to provide like excellent reviews for papers that were feeding into their journal. Oh, cool, nice.
I mean, we're always looking, like, I think any editor is always looking for people who are, an expert in an area and willing to provide good reviews, right? That's always like useful. So
yeah, very much so. And marketing education review, that's an interesting one. I don't know too much about that journal.
Oh yeah, I think there's two: marketing education review and like Journal of Market Education. Those are two like more like teaching focused like journals, and I think both of those. I don't know exactly. I think one probably was Vicky Crittenden because she's the editor of one of them right now. I think it's JME ? But they're cool little journals, and they do like they're niche sort of like JAR, which I love, right? But they're focused on like research around like teaching, and like even there's some cool papers in there about like different here's a project that works and some like a comparison between one class and another one that didn't have it or something, or ways of doing different classroom activities, or looking at the value or different ways of framing courses and how people find them attractive or not for registration, right? So there's some kind of cool sort of niche stuff in there around teaching.
Have you found that to be a good leverage for you on your own CV to be associated with a diverse range of journals, but also including one that's teaching focused as well?
It can help because I mean, many times when you're applying for jobs, you have to like argue about like a teaching or write a teaching statement that argues for our quality as an educator. And I think like being able to say that you're part of those journals is useful. I think they're also good journals to read to get ideas and classroom activities, things like that. There's one like I used to run my social media class where students would work on they would work on doing social media for a small and medium sized business in the local area. And they would go off and like find a client, and then like they'd actually like take over and like post their social media for like a semester. It was kind of cool. And then of course COVID hit, and that was like so many small businesses were hurt and like or just busy with like other stuff, understandably, right? And so like it was actually like it was the conference right before COVID hit. It was Winter AMA here in San Diego, and one of the teaching awards at the Teaching Learning SIG like special presentation was a professor who was had a super cool idea. He did the same thing, but he did it for t-shirts. And so rather than working with a local company, what he did is he had the students chose a charity. They could choose whatever charity they wanted, and then they would design a t-shirt, and it was print on demand. So there's no risk, right? And they print one or two, and the students would use it to create ads and then run those ads to try to sell the t-shirts, make money for charity, right? So basically it was an excuse for them to basically invent their own product. which was kind of cool. And so that worked perfectly during COVID. And I would never have known if I hadn't gone to that teaching, a word presentation.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. No, that is very interesting how you can sort of incorporate some of those learnings into, I guess, what other people are doing, but can kind of adapt those ideas to your own courses. Is that?
Yeah, I think it's always good to just sort of be up on that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. So I picked your brain quite a lot about JAR and obviously all of the other places you're reviewing for and stuff like that. On the research side of things, so your Google Scholar account, I think, is very, very impressive. You got over 5,000 citations, H-index over 30. Very, very impressive, I think, especially for someone at an associate professor level. I do quite a lot of scoping out of people, not just for the podcast, but for just my own curiosity. I can tell you it is, like, from what I've seen from other people in marketing, very well established.
Cool. That's awesome. I'll take it. Thank you.
and you do publish in some of those top tier journals like Journal of Public Policy and Marketing and stuff like that. And how would you say, because I'm not actually sure what your PhD thesis was about, but how has your research agenda changed since your PhD candidature to now in your role?
So my topic was on consumer generated advertising. Okay. So it was about this idea of consumers going and creating, this was back, rewind to like 2006, right? It was like YouTube was new, all this kind of stuff was exciting. Oh. Right. So like the idea of like consumers going and creating their own ads or spoofs of ads and posting those on the internet was like groundbreaking. Right. And so it was looking at like why they were doing that and like how companies like might respond to them and like how consumers also might respond to them. So it was a bit more of a strategy focus. We had a cool paper that we put into like California Management Review on looking at like why they're doing it, the motivations. That worked out well. The rest of it didn't really actually go anywhere that great. I don't think if the papers got published, but that was the topic I had. But since then, like I think, to be honest, like looking at my record, it's very scattered, like in the sense that I like shiny new things. You'll probably notice that there's a lot of variation in my topics, right? And to be honest, like it's probably not the best idea for like brand new people to kind of like mirror me, because I've done a lot of like reading of new literatures, right? Because it's like there's a new topic and it's like, oh, I don't know anything about that, let's find out. And you go off and spend time on that, which I think it's more interesting to me because it's like a bunch of whatever's like new and exciting I'll look at, but it's also a lot of work getting up to speed on those different areas, right? Whereas I think, focusing on one area and kind of driving that for like, a while is more efficient, but it's obviously like you're less able to kind of hop around, right? So
yeah, because you do hear mixed sort of feedback and advice there, whether you should specialize and be the nth degree world expert on this very small part, or whether you should try to diversify a little bit into 2 or 3 different areas, or I don't know, from what you're sort of saying, you kind of like dabble in quite a lot. You do hear.
I think the hard part with like focusing on one area is that like topics kind of like are trendy for a while. And then like just naturally, like you learn as much as you possibly can about a certain topic as a field. And it's like the research kind of goes down because there's less to discover, right? Like I like influencers, for instance, right? There's been a ton of great research on influencers the last 5 years or so, right? Like how much more is there to discover about influencers? Maybe there's another 10 years. I don't know. Maybe another 2 years, right? Like when does that crest, right? Like, so it's like, I think with any topic, like there's a lot of like, it's like a gold rush, right? You're trying to mine all of the topics and knowledge you could discover about something. And at a certain point, you just kind of run out of stuff to discover. And then I think being tied to a topic for too long can be bad too, because then it's like people get bitter that their stuff isn't getting published. It's like, no, it's probably just like, you've discovered everything. There's a time to like go on to something new, right? So.
That's fascinating. Do you reckon it's why you kind of see over people's careers, like especially people who are nearing their 60s, or people who have retired or maybe no longer with us anymore, and you backtrack through their career and you can almost see like, they've moved from this area to this area, and there's maybe a connection of slight literature, or maybe there's like a tangent of like the method or something like that, but they've moved between areas. Oh, that might be why.
It makes sense, right? It's like, how much can there be to learn about something? Maybe there's a ton more. I don't know. Maybe they'll evolve in some way or something. That's what I love about like I think loosely I look at like technology and marketing, and like how those two are kind of like interacting. And like, to be honest, it's been kind of cool the last 20 years because there's been so many different changes. Like we had the internet come, which brought a whole bunch of changes for marketing. Then we had social media come, then we had influencers come. So there's been like these hits of like change that are happening. I think we're next probably going to see VR. That's I think coming in the next. We're probably a bit earlier for it to kind of have like cool stuff at this point. Oh, I think it's coming at this point. But like probably in a couple of years, we're going to see like much more dramatic changes if we start using it more and more every day as consumers, right? But I think all of these changes are just, it's taking them, it's like currently old like marketing, but making it fresh, right? And there's like new angles and new things to discover and stuff. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to hear you think VR is the way to go. I've just invested.
I don't know, but I think we'll have to find out, right? So, yeah.
Well, you heard it here from the JAR.
Zac says it's happening. Go for it, yeah.
Because we just bought a Meta Quest 3. Which is
cool, yeah.
And planning to do experiments there. And there's Sony have like a VR version as well. And then next year we're now release their version. So yeah, this is a bit of an area that if I can figure out the technology and understand the literature well enough, it could be working in the next couple of years.
I think it's gonna be phenomenal. I think that the Apple device looks absolutely. I mean, I love Apple, but like I just think that their ability to make something so much more user friendly. Because I bought the Quest 2 or something, and like both times I'm like, this is just too complicated. Like you can work it out, of course, if people do, right? But I mean, like I look at it from like, like my mom who doesn't like understand technology that well, is it intuitive to her, right? And I think that they looking at like how the Apple ones like with your fingers and stuff, I'm like people I can get that probably more quickly, but we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And people might initially be off put by like the price tag. I think in Australia it's like $5,000 or something like that. It's released.
Oh yeah, it's insane. Yeah.
If you think eventually it will incorporate your handset for your phone, it will incorporate your laptop. You can project a TV on a wall where there's no TV, right? And so you're probably like halving your costs if you don't need to furnish your house or anything like that with all the other electronic devices.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Like, I mean, I looked at it as well too, and I was like $2,000, and I'm like, like the Apple screen I'm working on is $2,000, right? So I mean, like this is a much bigger screen, right? So it's not terrible that way, right? Exactly right. Yeah.
And the good news is the Meta Quest, I tried the original Quest when it was first released, but the 3 seems to be somewhat intuitive. I had issues connecting it to the Wi-Fi because I was trying to get on the uni's Wi-Fi. And, there's all these security protections and stuff like that. At home, it was so easy. It's just like connecting your phone or laptop. But I went into it with some like hesitations, but yeah, so far it's blown me away by the quality of it.
That's cool. I'm curious to see how you like it.
Yeah, I forget that. And so that makes me even more excited about the Apple version because I'm thinking, if this is an $800 device from like Meta, what is this insane price versus from like Apple? Like, what's that going to look like? It's going to be crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be.
I mean, it's insane to me, like the eye tracking on it. The fact that you can just like what you look at and then you just click on it. Like, and you don't have to like move your hand because it knows what you're looking at is what you're going to click on. Right? Yeah. Like your eyes as a pointer it's just so cool. Like I'm curious if that actually works out. But
yeah. So I guess with these sort of things, are these things that you can to fund your research? I guess if you were hypothetically moving this area, does your university have like a PD fund scheme or professional development scheme?
We do, but it's not. I mean, it's not bad, but it's definitely not like rich, right? Like, so we get $4,000 a year for like research and conference travel. So like, if you do a conference, it already is like kind of half, right? So it's definitely like, I mean, it's some schools are obviously have less, but like, it's not like some schools that have like 20 or 30K. You hear some people who have those like large budgets, right? So we're not that lucky, but it definitely could be worse as well too. So
yeah. I've noticed that it does change, and the systems do change quite a lot at different universities. Some people have like there's a pool of money that gets allocated from the university, and everyone in the department has to write almost like a mini grant to compete for it. Other universities I've heard you can go to a conference, but every 3 years. And then you're kind of barred for the next 2, which I think is not a great policy because conferences are amazing for networking and building collaborations. So, and to get to know on the field, get to know the editors, it just seems like I don't think a good policy, short-term thinking policy. Others are reward systems. So if you do well, you get money to then continue doing well, I guess.
That's my preferred like style. I mean, like Monash had that when I was there, and that to me made a lot of sense because to me, the more research you're doing, the more money you need for research because you have more costs for experiments and like TAs or stimuli creation, and of course conferences as well too. Like, to me, it just makes sense that if you do more, you should have more funding. But I don't make the show here, so
one day, who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
So I'd love to chat to you about one of your recent papers, because I think that's something that, the audience of this podcast is, generally a mix up of other academics, people from industry as well, and a good cohort of undergraduate students. So I think sometimes these articles they're either behind paywalls or they're not accessible. No one has, enough time to read 30 pages and everything like that. So I'd love to go through one of your papers and sort of pick your brain about it.
For sure. Yeah.
So the one that I sort of pointed out, I think I chose it because you're the first author on it, so I thought you would know it hopefully a little bit better. And one that's also very recent and in your journal, actually. So it's called How Deepfakes and Artificial Intelligence Could Reshape the Advertising Industry, the Coming Reality of AI Fakes and Their Potential Impacts on Consumer Behavior. So I think that's something that's really kind of relevant given the news and all sorts of things in this area. So my first sort of question is, how did this paper kind of come about? Like, what was there a conversation with someone, some data became available, you read an article and you thought this could have AI impacts, or?
Yeah, so like this one, we were actually ahead of the curve on this, which is kind of cool. But it really came about like one of the co-authors on the paper, Jan Keatsman. He's up in Victoria in Canada, and he is an IS / like marketing researcher, like a professor. And so he was the one who actually had seen this new sort of like the deep fakes and GANs and all that kind of stuff coming on. And he said, this is going to be a cool topic. We should do something on this. And so that's how we first started kind of working in this area. And then basically it's like Kenny, super sharp and has a really good sense of like thinking about ideas and stuff. And then like Kirk and Sean are people I've worked with a lot. So Sean's in Australia, he's in Swinburne. And then Kirk is in London at King's College. And we basically went through and like, it was an extension of a paper we did for the Journal of Advertising. So we had like a model that we developed there of like understanding how consumers are going to react to and process these like deep fake style ads, the ones that are fake, right? The generative AI basically, before the term was a thing. And so this was looking at like, okay, how is this actually going to affect the ad industry? Because we thought these tools are coming and they actually go to very far reaching implications for everything from like models to how workflows happen in agencies to the number of ads you can create to what you can do in ads, right? I think the coolest thing is that like you can imagine like you get an ad on your Instagram, from, I don't know, Levi's, and you're in the ad, right? They've taken your image off your Instagram, run it through deepfake, and you're now seeing yourself wearing the jeans, right? Like, how cool would that be? Or creepy.
Yeah, my initial reaction was creepy, but then I'm like, that would then at least let me see what I look like in the jeans. I guess you'd have to opt into it, whether it's creepy or not, but I don't know, your research might have said that. Okay, so Levi's, it will show you that's really kind of cool. So I have, I know of Sean Sands and his work at Swinburne and stuff like that. I had a few colleagues who've worked with him a lot, like Justin Cohen and Jason and stuff like that. Good guys. I don't know Kirk all that much. Or is it other co-authors besides them too?
Kirk, and then there's like Jan Keatsman, the one in Victoria, and then Kenneth. Yeah, he's a USD as well too. Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect. I'll have to have a look more into their research. Are they swim around this sort of area?
Kenny's just more general sort of advertising, and then Jan is really sort of about like I said, IS and marketing, right? And then like Sean and Kirk have like worked a lot like me. I think to sort of in like sort of new areas that are interesting to them, and we've done a lot of crossover work as well too. Yeah.
So you touched on a previous paper that you'd worked on for the Journal of Advertising and how that kind of helped frame this article. Was there any other papers that sort of helped shape this article as well that you kind of leaned on?
There was a business horizons that we did looking at like how AI and machine learning can be used by the ad industry. And we kind of looked across like all the different stages of like the consumer journey and how this would be useful. It's kind of a cool paper as well. It came out, I think, 2020 ? And we kind of like loosely kind of used the framework we had there for this paper. But beyond that, it was like not especially. I mean, it's kind of like a new topic, a new area. So I mean, like we kind of obviously like pulled what we could on the like technical side of it. But in terms of like looking at changes, we went back kind of in time and took a look and saw like, were there any papers around like what TV would do, or what internet would do when it came out, right? Because you're looking at sort of when you get these paradigm shifts in like technologies, like how do people react to that? And there's some cool kind of work at a very theoretical level on like how people react to technology changes and all that kind of stuff. And then there's some sort of more pragmatic stuff of just looking at like what exactly were those changes, and like, what do people talk about in those papers, and what can we talk about as well too, right?
Yeah.
So I guess the short answer, it was tough.
Yeah, it sounds tough, but I think your solution actually sounds pretty. I mean, obviously it worked. I think that was a great solution. In terms of data for this paper, how did that sort of come about, or what was the scope of it there?
Yeah, so really it was like looking through obviously the literature, and then it was going through and looking through a bunch of like articles we could find, like popular press ones as well too, on the topic, and like finding examples of how this was working. And then it was also like talking to industry professionals and just sort of saying like, what are their thoughts on like, this is what this tool is. How do you think this will change things for you, right?
Yeah. So it was a qualitative sort of based analysis?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. How big was that? How many people did you speak to from industry?
I think it was like around 20 or something. Yeah.
Now people from advertising industry, or people who schedule media? Or...
Yeah. No, it's like mostly like advertising. Yeah. So that's one of the advantages of like, obviously, Kirk and Sean, right? Is that Kirk's in London and there's a lot of like headquarters there, right? And like, the US as well too is good for that too. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess what everyone kind of really wants to know is, what did you end up finding out?
I think there's a lot of really kind of like interesting changes you could think about. So you could think about like the ads can become much more personalized, which is kind of cool, right? You think about like what we're seeing now in generative AI, like you don't have to necessarily go and do a photo shoot. Like you can take, a photo and you can like merge photos. You can, change out stuff, right? I think the big one is going to be models as well too, right? So just like they have in the movies, like stunt doubles, right? You could imagine an era where like you don't have to send Nicole Kidman to the set, right? You just send, her like digital likeness as a file, right? Somebody else who looks kind of like her stands in, and then they just apply in the Nicole Kidman effect to it, and like it becomes her face and her likeness and all that kind of stuff. And she's never even gone to the set. She's never actually, even seen the thing, right? So like that part's kind of cool. It can become way more efficient, right, for models, right? At the same time, you could also have, likenesses stolen. Somebody could take a photo of you and then use you in different things, and you may not approve of that or like that, right? So you can imagine if you're a celebrity, it can become much riskier, right? At the most extreme as well, so you could think about the fact that like you could potentially have it where we don't actually need models, right? You could go through and you could create a computer AI generated rendering of somebody who isn't actually a real person, right? And just like we hire like, or we don't hire, but we use like cartoon characters and all that kind of stuff, mascots and stuff, because there's no payment, right? You don't have to pay them to be in an ad, right? The same thing could happen with a virtual model, right?
Yeah.
It could be like maybe models will be out of work. Who knows, right? So
that's fascinating, especially the digital likeness, because one of the issues with having celebrities as, endorsers or, the face of the brand is they could get swept up in controversy. So the most globally famous one is Jared from Subway. Whereas if you use digital likeness of someone, I guess that kind of separates them out somewhat.
Well, it's still their likeness, right? But you could create somebody who's like fake. You could have somebody like have their likeness stolen, right? There's a lot of like ambiguity around what's going to be happening there, right? So
slightly different nose shape or something, and they call them Jacob or something.
Yeah, like you can also get very creative ads as well, right? You can do stuff in ads that would be like sort of like CGI and stuff like that, right? That would just be too expensive to do, 10 years ago, right?
Yeah. Do you think that would then result in advertising being cheaper and more accessible to small businesses?
Possibly. I mean, it could also just be that like do our standards go up? Like, I mean, there was like we had a conference here at USC on like a local one on marketing, and the guy who's the head of marketing for the San Diego Zoo, right? He was talking about how like before, rewind 20 years ago, you made, and it's true, right? You made like 3 TV commercials and like 3 print ads, and you were done for the year, right? And like now you're creating content daily, right? Like it just becomes so much more accelerated, and there's just so much proliferation of it, right? So are we going to go to an era where like because we can, we're going to start creating 30 versions of stuff and 40 versions, right? Because you can also personalize it. You could have it where people who were 10 years old now see a different person in their ad. People who are different ethnicity see a different thing, different gender, right? So you can suddenly like become much more niche with the way you go through and target ads as well too, because you can create content very quickly that fits those different profiles and segments, you know?
Yeah, I guess a follow-up question to that is, I'm a 35-year-old Caucasian Australian male. Seeing that profile in an advertisement, does that resonate with me more than seeing a female African-American person who's in their 60s? Is there anything that sort of suggests that that would be true?
I mean, at a broad level, I think yes. I mean, there's this like I've actually been working on like a big paper looking at like diversity in advertising. It's in the review process right now.
Yeah.
But like it's kind of interesting because like people at a quite broadly, people who are to kind of like summarize a whole bunch of papers, right? Like people at a broad level can kind of identify with almost anybody, but it is stronger if it's somebody that is like you or somebody that's more aspirational. But it's the effect's actually stronger for people who are in non-majority groups, right? So like people who like somebody who's going to be a majority person, so it could be like a Caucasian male or whatever, right? Is they've shown that they're actually pretty good at imagining being somebody else, but it becomes more important for people who don't typically see themselves as much in advertising. Right. Then it actually sort of stands out more. So there might actually be more effect happening in those groups, right? If they can see, increased representation, through ads. But on the flip side of that, right? Like if it's created through a computer, is it seen as fake? Right. And this is something else. Another study we're working on as well, too, shows that like in some cases you can see a reversal of that effect, right? When people don't think it's actually authentic. Right. So to hire people who are actually in minorities in your ads is different than to just go through and put a fake one up or what's seen as a fake one through generative AI, right? So I don't know. I think we have to be careful with how these things are done, right?
Yeah, definitely. I wonder, and I guess there's either going to be or there is research on, are people good at spotting the real deal versus a generated version, especially for advertising that, say, Toyota have a car ad, and then they have a different ad. Everyone's the same, everything's the same, but the person driving the ad changes. They might know whether I have a family or a wife or a husband, who knows? And they just tailor the ad to look like my demographic and whether I'm good at being able to tell that or not. That'd be fascinating.
Yeah. No, I'd be curious.
They work, so you just assume they're all fake.
I wonder, yeah. I mean, some of them are getting pretty damn good at like making stuff that looks realistic.
Yeah.
I think it's like it is very surprising. I also wonder too, like, I mean, like you just imagine like, could it be subtle stuff? Because I think that there's a freakiness factor that kind of goes up as it gets too close. But I wonder, like, imagine you see somebody driving a car and they're not in like an unknown neighborhood. Maybe it's like 3 streets from you. Maybe it's like at a local park that or something, right? You can imagine doing that. Like you can imagine that would get your attention more because like, oh, that's the kid's school, or that's like the place I go to, or whatever. Like, you could do that kind of stuff potentially a lot faster, right? If you've got the stuff already like stored somewhere,
Oh, wow. Because I was just thinking about changing up the actual, like the human in it, I guess, but I hadn't thought about the products occurring. Like, even if it's like you going back to your Levi's example, it could be, oh, that's the Levi's store that's on, the local mall.
Yeah.
Like I recognize the actual storefront. Far out. That's really cool and scary, but kind of cool.
Yeah.
Wow, there's a lot to be done in this area.
We'll see what happens. Yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah.
So so the technology's there, or it's maybe potentially still early. What are the odds that, I'm watching these ads at the moment that are not real actors or not real environments? Are they the ads that I'm seeing at the moment, or is it coming next year, or?
I think there probably are some out there already that, I mean, there's been some famous examples like the Coca-Cola one and stuff like that. Like you get a lot of creativity kind of happen quickly with it. But I think that there's like more subtle stuff is already happening, I think. Like catalogs, I think you can probably, I bet you some of the models that you see in catalogs are already like, perhaps not real. I wonder as well too, if they're going through and like, you'll have to see where they'll change up the color of stuff. It'll be the exact same photo, but they'll have like the black shirt on, the blue shirt on, the white shirt on, whatever. Right, like that can be done using these kind of tools as well too. It's obviously not that dramatic, but it's like it's a quick way to kind of go through and create those different forms. But I'm sure that there's stuff that's already happening. Like, have you seen the new sort of like Adobe Firefly things?
Only
like effects that they've got.
Only very briefly.
Yeah, I just looked at it briefly as well too, but I was like, whoa, this is super cool. Yeah. Like you could just be like, add a tiger to the lake and it will have a tiger drinking out of the lake. And it was like, how? It's just so cool how the stuff is kind of coming, right? And I saw like Dolly 3, the new like image generator thing just came out. I haven't played with that yet, but it's supposed to be even better, right? So I think we're just going to see a lot of change the next couple of years with this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I can kind of see how that relates to the strike that was happening in Hollywood and stuff like that with, I guess,
of course,
that they'd be out of jobs because their digital likeness would be taken. I can kind of see how that fits into this now. Obviously not to the same extent, but yeah.
Yeah.
They had a similar thing with video game manufacturers and things like that, how they were worried that the coders and everything would be replaced by artificial intelligence designing games.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think it probably would just like help speed it up, right? It'll be easier to go through, and the more routine stuff becomes easy to kind of like automate, right? So
anything to get the next Grand Theft Auto finally released. What's it been now? Almost a decade or something crazy.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Like a long time. We'll be on PlayStation 6 or something by the time that happens.
Oh, wow.
So in terms of your research and your qualitative interviews and asking people from industry how this is going to have an effect, what impact will your paper have on other academics, do you think?
I'm hoping it'll give people ideas, right? I think I think part of it is like, obviously it's like useful to like think about like how is this going to affect the industry, right? And I can imagine there potentially being like different sort of like businesses that might start up based on these different ideas, right? But I think for us as academics, it's like, oh, like how will people respond to these ads? How will people respond to like, their information being used to create ads that look like them? Like, is it good, bad, when, why? Like all that kind of stuff is kind of interesting to look at. So
yeah. I agree with you. I think there seems to be a very fruitful research agenda going forward. Yeah, definitely. And so that's what you kind of think still needs to be done, assessing those sorts of questions.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of space, I think, like with generative AI right now. I think there's a ton. So
cool. I got a lot out of that paper, so thank you so much for sharing that with me. It's always nice to actually chat to the authors about the actual paper, because I think you do get those sort of deeper insights, and it resonates with me a little bit. But for those who are listening, I will add the DOI and everything like that into the show notes, so you can click it on and cite the paper and incorporate it into your business. Sort of just rounding out the interview, I've taken quite a lot of your time already, so thank you. I have a few more questions. One of them relates to, so I'm a little bit of a reader, but I tend to read things like, as we read so much, right? Whether it's reviewing work of colleagues or students or for papers and stuff like that. And you would think that I'd like, guilty pleasure reading, like nonfiction or whatever, but I like to read sort of things that are still related to marketing or things that are self-development or stuff like that. You might be something similar, I don't know. But essentially what I'm asking you is, do you have any sort of book recommendations that you'd recommend?
I'm going to give like broad categories as opposed to like specific books, but like I'm a huge fan of like stuff around efficiency. So like I must say, like I enjoy those kind of things of like, what are different ways to be more efficient with like just, organizing schedules or things like that, working, whatever the style is there. And then also looking at, what's the second one? Efficiency. There's something else as well too. And I totally lost it. I had it like a second ago. Oh my God.
Oh, good.
It may come back, it may not, but yeah.
So you like those sorts of books as well, where you read them and you can pick up little tidbits about how to be more efficient.
Yeah. I think it just makes a big difference. Like if you can save like 5 minutes a day doing something, and you can repeat that every day for the next 10 years, that's a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
And I think like, Chat GPT can be helpful for some stuff. I think that like, forms and stuff you can do. I think, scheduling and to-do lists are just like a new thing that just is really helpful to do. Calendar invites. It shocks me how many people don't use calendar invites. I'm like, really? Or to-do lists for that. Yeah. No, it's just interesting. I think just like to know what you're looking at. Or one thing I learned from Sean, like Sean's amazing. This is like every night he goes through what's happening the next day, and he does a to-do list of like what his tasks are for the next morning. And like I learned that from him, and it's just so effective. You wake up and you're like, I know what I'm working on, right? And like from reading the books and stuff too, it's like, you work on the most difficult tasks first, and you kind of like, I prioritize, like I call it like surfing my day. So like usually I'm more energized in the morning, right? So I'll do like the more difficult tasks then. And then as I sort of like get perhaps more worn out as the day goes on, then I'll shift to like lighter tasks, right? So maybe it's like reading a paper I'm reviewing for the first time. You can kind of do that. It's a lighter activity, or grading, depending on what it is, right? Or, proofing a paper you're writing, or doing references or stuff like that. Something that's kind of like not as like taxing, right? Mm-hmm. That's sort of a lighter activity day, like thing to do in the day, right? So I just like choosing like when you do stuff and making sure that you have a plan of what you're able to do is like really kind of like useful.
Yeah. I like that. That sounds all terrific. I like the Sean's approach as well, by the sounds of it, writing what he needs to do the next day, like the previous day. Yeah. And the only reason I'm assuming that works is because I've seen that guy's Google Scholar profile, and he is pumping out papers.
Sean is a busy man. Yeah. And he's like a father of like 4 and everything. He's a very impressive man. Yeah. So there's, one other one that I learned this summer, I was listening to like a podcast as well too, about like productivity. And like, they were saying that like, and I'm still working on this, is like everything that goes into your to-do list also should go into your calendar. Right. And that way it prevents you from overcommitting. Right. Because of the fact that if it's going to take 2 hours to do that, it has to go in the next 2 weeks or whatever, or something of your calendar of like, when will that happen? Right. And I'm like, that's brilliant, because otherwise it ends up like, where my to-do list is this big, but it's going to take me a month to do that, which I don't have the time for. Right. So like, it's supposed to help with like overcommitting, which I think is like, perhaps, it's become more of an issue, I think, for me as I've kind of gone through my career, but I'm sure many people have that as well too. Right. Where there's too many things you want to do. So I think like sort of like being cognizant of like how much time we have and like what we're choosing to spend it on is also important too. And I'm not good at that yet, but I'm working on that. That's the next phase.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because like, if you have to say write an exam for a course, and it's going to take me X number of minutes, and you can kind of block that out on your calendar. But how do you do that for tasks like writing a paper, which is going to take you a bunch of times over over an extended time? How do you kind of work that in?
Yeah, no, for papers it's much tougher, because it can go slower or faster than what it is, right? The only trick I found for that is to like break it down. It's just like, so like you don't write a paper, you do a literature review, you like, then you go through and you design a study, and then you run a study, then you analyze it. So like there's a bunch of micro tasks, and those can be like more concretely sort of estimated, but the whole paper as an entity is too big, right? Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Break the bigger tasks that are spread over a period of time into smaller chunks you can fit into. Okay, I like that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Another approach, like there's one like professor I had for when I was doing my research methods class, and he's like, he just allocates like a certain amount of time every day to doing research. So for him, it's like the first every day, from when he wakes up until lunchtime is his research. He's a very good researcher. And he's just like, whatever you can do in those 4 hours is like his work day for like research. And then he switches to other stuff. And he does it first because it's the most involved thing to do, right? And it's also, you can come in fresh. And it's like, the frustrating thing is like some days you might spend 3 hours or 4 hours just searching to discover that a paper won't work, right? Which is still useful because you learn something that's not going to happen, right? But like you don't know until you try it, right? But it feels fruitless, right? Because like at the end of it, you just come back and walk away, right? But it's still useful. And so
yeah, I find that some of the weirdest parts about like academia, especially with like writing, where a good chunk of it can, like your research can be things that are non-tangible, like just thinking about a topic. So you might write a couple of sentences, you go home after 4 hours or like you stop that work after a few hours, and you're like, oh, I haven't done much, but the brain power, it's like, yeah. Whereas if we were like a laborer or something like that, we could point to a wall or something that we've built. Yeah. It's a bit of it.
Also, like, I mean, like I love doing stuff that is like more tangible for that reason, right? Mm. So it's like I find cleaning to be very satisfying because you can physically see that like something's getting cleaner, right? Whereas, like, it's exactly right. Sometimes you write stuff and you're like, you might write 4 pages today, and tomorrow go like, that wasn't that great, and have to start over again. But you still discovered that, and you wouldn't have got there if you hadn't done that, right? So it's like it's part of the process,
Yeah. And then it ends up being the questions you get asked at conferences about the paper anyway. About, oh yeah, I did try that, and this is why I didn't do it. Like I spent four hours of my life realizing why I didn't do it, but now I have an answer.
Yeah. And I think it happens in other stuff too, like design, right? You think about like, a really beautifully designed, like I love my Breville espresso machine, right? It's an Australian company, there you go. But like they clearly went through many prototypes because it is such a nicely designed machine. Everything's in the right spot and stuff, right? I'm sure there were, 100 versions that we never saw. Right, which is sort of the same, right? They arrived at that nice one, which works well, right? But it's only because they tried out a whole bunch of stuff that didn't work, right? So
yeah, that's a good way of viewing it, actually. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, that some of the audience are sort of younger undergrads. And so they're thinking to themselves, okay, I'm going to graduate maybe next year or in a couple of years. How can I put myself in the best possible position to landing that initial role? So any insights you have for them for industry, I guess, would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest one is it's the same thing I've been telling students actually a while now is actually like engage with people. I think that like nowadays it's so easy to like look up people online and find them that I think that it's a shame not to. And I think so few people do that, right? So I encourage like both people looking, for jobs like in industry, even researchers too, right? I mean, like if you find somebody that's researching in an area you like, you can email them like, hey, like I'm working on a similar thing. Can I run an idea by you? Can I have a Zoom? Like, it happens so rarely that it's kind of cool if it does, right? And I think the same thing for like getting a job for like undergrads, right? Is like, you can go on LinkedIn, you can say filter for people who are, uni SA grads. And then you can look at Pepsi or look at Coke or whatever it is you want to work for. And you can filter for people who had the same school as you or same city or whatever you want to do. And it will show you who those employees are, right? And then you can look them up there and you can send them a message and be like, hey, you're working in an area similar to me. We went to the same school. Like, I'd love to have a Zoom or have a coffee or whatever and like learn more about your job or learn more about how you got where you are. Like, it's so flattering and so cool and so unique. And I think like people just naturally kind of want to respond to that, right? And I think so few people do it that it's something that we need to do more of, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's amazing actually, because you do have all of this information that people are putting out online about themselves that you can use. And I'd never even thought about using the filtering functions on LinkedIn.
Yeah. We had somebody like in a career advisor show me that. She was telling the students that like I advised like the marketing student group here for a while. And like I saw that, I was like, wow, I didn't know either, but it's just so cool. Right. Yeah. And I think it's not in the sense of like, oh, hire me now. But the best thing to do is to do it early, do it when you're not looking for a job, right? But it's expanding your network, right? If you can follow them, and then if you then do like see a job there in 6 months, you could then message them and be like, hey, do you think this is a good fit for me or not? And a lot of companies also have it like where they'll actually like give an incentive to the employee if they recommend them.
Oh, right.
Like a person who gets hired, right? So like they will win if they recommend you and get money or something else, right? You also win because you get an internal recommendation, which is good too. Maybe it's even coming if they do an event or they do a speaker or something, whatever, right? Or even just following the company LinkedIn and sort of being aware of what they're doing. But I think a lot of those like kind of softer stuff like is kind of cool. And I think people kind of underdo that nowadays, which makes it ironically even more important, which is kind of cool,
Yeah, I think it sounds like a great way to sort of stand out as well. Because, if they have, say, I don't know, I'm just making up a number, 20 applicants for the one position, and they see your name in one of them, and they're like, oh, I've seen, Colin at this event for the last 2 years, and he seems very intelligent, very reliable. You're way more likely to get an interview than a cold CV.
Totally. Or, I mean, it's even like stuff like I've had students do it and then they get invited to do like a job shadow for a day or something, which is also amazing because then you get to go and like meet other people in the agency or in the company, right? So you're also known, right? Maybe that turns into something else. Maybe it doesn't. At the very least, you learn more about how they work and what their role is, right? Because I think a lot of like jobs in marketing, people don't really understand what exactly happens because it's not always that clear, right? So I think like on a day-to-day basis, people don't really know what does a marketing analyst do? What does a marketing researcher do? Like, all these kind of things. So seeing it like going through their day is actually kind of helpful to kind of get a sense of maybe you don't like it. Maybe you want to do something else, which is fine too. Or maybe you do love it, right? But
yeah, actually, that's probably like, an additional benefit because you might think, I definitely want to work in this industry or this is definitely the role I want to do. And then you see what the day-to-day life is. You're like, no, not for me. So it kind of saves you.
Yeah, no. It's totally true. Like there's one student I had in my social media marketing class, which is that hands-on one I was telling you about. And like at the end of it, he came up and he's like, Colin, thank you so much. Like I really appreciate this class because I learned that I don't like marketing. And like, and I was like, no, I'm so happy you found that out now than in 5 years, whatever, or even 2 years, right? So the stakes are low. So now is the time to change your major and you can figure out what you like. That's great, So
I think that's hilarious because it's like, how do I not take that personally without thinking that I have done you a favor? Like,
no, I mean, he was actually genuinely grateful. It was just like, I thought I wanted to do marketing in this course because we actually did stuff. He's like, I just don't like it. I'm like, totally cool. Like, I'm happy you figured that out, So.
Oh, I still find that absolutely hilarious. Perfect. So I've learned so much from you today, so I very much appreciate it. One thing that I like to leave on with everyone is a general sort of statement. Like, is there any, like, do you have a favorite quote or some life advice that you've heard or something you'd like to impart on the audience? Is there anything some advice, I guess?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest one is I don't know who I learned this from. I was just like thinking about like what you think about in terms of expectations. Is expected value positive or negative, right? And so I think a lot of people, like I read this book once on like luck, right? And it's not, some people consider lucky. It's not so much people are actually like lucky, is that they try more stuff, right? So luckier people they'll sign up for obviously for giveaways and that kind of stuff. But more importantly, like they actually just engage more. So like if you're in an elevator, you'll talk to somebody. If you're on a plane, you'll talk to somebody. If you see something, you'll try applying, you'll try doing something, right? And it's like not everything works, right? But if you increase the number of times that you try doing something by just sheer numbers, you're going to have more stuff happen to you, right? I think that's sort of what we're talking about with the getting a job. If you know more people in the marketing area in your city, chances are you're going to probably get a job faster than someone who doesn't, right? I think it's the same thing of just like, trying for stuff, submit the paper, try going to the conference. Like some might not work, right? You may not get good feedback or may not work out, right? But the more stuff you do, the more chances you have to succeed. I think that's sort of the big thing. Yeah. So just, is the expected value positive? Is there a chance it could work out well? Then, why not give it a whirl, right?
Yeah. What I love about that is it's so positively framed. It's, I love it. That's really good advice. Awesome.
It's hard sometimes though. I mean, some days I just like don't want to talk to people in the elevator or whatever, right? But it's also like you can make good connections that way. I'm sure you've done that, right? It's yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colin. Very much appreciate it. I've learned a lot from you in terms of your paper and your research career and everything you've done at the journal. Thank you so much for spending your evening with me.
Yeah. It was an absolute pleasure, and you've been a complete delight to talk to you. So thank you so much for preparing and for having me on as well. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
Hey guys, it's Zac Anesbury here with just a couple of quick reminders. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, then make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. There are plenty more interviews to come with some of the world's leading marketing academics and practitioners. You do not want to miss these. In the meantime, if you're looking for another way to connect, then follow me on Twitter at Zac Anesbury. That is ZACANESBURY for my take on the marketing issues of the day.
That was the Zac Anesbury Show.